Disco delivers affordable, science-backed skincare treatments to your home. The Disco Starter Set helps guys fight oily skin and razor burn and keeps your skin hydrated. I've had great results with it. You'll get 30% off at letsdisco.com/Pacman. The link is down below. All right, welcome everybody. I think we're sort of at a point where it makes sense to issue a reminder and go through the data that there is still no actual evidence that the COVID vaccines approved in the United States have caused even one death, even a single death. And I had people yesterday sending me links to the Joe Rogan Sanjay Gupta interview. I had links to articles based on VAERS reporting, and it just is a good time to refresh what is actually known about the vaccines. Now, this is not a segment about the Russian vaccine. This is not a segment about the Chinese vaccine or what they have or haven't done. I just don't have data that I can look at that I could say with any certitude that is reliable data. I'm not saying anything one way or the other about those vaccines. I just want to be clear that if you're going to email me things about the Russian vaccine, I am doing a segment here specifically about the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines approved and available here in the United States. And on those, there is no clear evidence whatsoever that they have caused any deaths in the United States. Now, this is different than have any vaccinated people died of COVID. Last time, 2 months ago, I did a similar segment with the data we had until then. And people wrote to me and said, David, sir, actually, they didn't say sir, they were less polite. They said, David, you're lying. There are plenty of vaccinated people that have died. That's different. The question here is, have the vaccines caused deaths? A couple of weeks ago, we had a very detailed report from the CDC with the latest data on adverse reactions to the vaccine. Now, it's important to remember, just because someone submitted a report of a death caused by the vaccine to the VAERS system, VAERS, doesn't mean that someone actually died as a result of the vaccine. As the CDC reminds us, and I encourage you, go through this article. We're linking to this a CDC page. Adverse events described on this page have been reported to the VAERS system. VAERS accepts reports of any adverse event following vaccination. That doesn't even mean related to the vaccination. And we'll talk about that in a second. Also, remember that the FDA requires that healthcare providers report deaths that take place after COVID vaccination, even if the healthcare provider has no real reason to think that the death is related to the vaccine. It's just, it happened after the vaccine. Sometimes people die weeks after the vaccine. Has nothing to do even with COVID, never mind the vaccine. It's still supposed to be reported and then evaluated. And again, anybody can submit such a report. As it says here, reports of adverse events to VAERS following vaccination, including deaths, do not necessarily mean that a vaccine caused a health problem. So what has the CDC put out? And this is their latest report. It's a couple weeks old now about vaccine reactions and adverse events. It's a matter of reading through these one by one and understanding them. First, anaphylaxis after COVID-19 vaccination. It's rare. It's occurred in 2 to 5 out of every million vaccinated people in the United States. Severe allergic reactions, including anaphylaxis, can occur after any vaccination. If it occurs, vaccination providers can effectively and immediately treat the reaction. That's not unique to the COVID vaccine, and it is extraordinarily rare and treatable. Okay, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome after the J&J vaccine is rare. As of October 6th, about 8 days ago, more than 15 million doses of the J&J vaccine were given. There have been 47 reports of people who got the vaccine and later developed TTS, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, concentrated among women under 50 years old. Okay? To date, 2 confirmed cases of TTS have been reported with Moderna after 382 million doses. So extraordinarily rare. We then have, as has been the case with other vaccines in the past, GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, in people who got J&J. Very rare disorder. 15 million J&J vaccines administered, 228 preliminary reports, and those have to be looked at more closely. Typically men over 50. So we talked about TTS, very rare, concentrated in women under 50 with the J&J. GBS, very rare, concentrated in men over 50 with the J&J. We then heard of myocarditis and pericarditis after COVID-19. Very rare. 1640 reports in VAERS. And again, remember, anybody can submit that. And there's no question there's a bandwagon effect. If people submitting, you should look at what's been submitted to VAERS. 1640 submitted among people under 30. Most cases reported, particularly in adolescent males and young adults. Through follow-up, including medical records review, the CDC and FDA have confirmed about half, 926 reports, and the relationship to vaccination is still being investigated. And then reports of deaths. This is a really important thing because VAERS has received 8,600 reports of deaths, but even linking them causally to the vaccine is not something that has been done yet. When you give hundreds of millions of people a vaccine, by sheer actuarial reality, the fact that people die, people are going to die in the days, weeks, and months after receiving a vaccine. That's supposed to be reported to VAERS, even if it's not believed to be because of the vaccine. And there is every reason to believe there are lots of false reports. But it is really important that we go by what the CDC has assessed based on the data. Now, what about blood clots? That's another one that we've been hearing a little bit about. Researchers are still looking at whether there's any connection between J&J and a rare type of blood clot. Very, very few cases still being investigated. And once we have something more definitive on that, we will talk about it. So when you hear, the talking point is basically look at all of the deaths that have been reported. People talk about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths due to the vaccine. The actual number of deaths reported to the system is 8,600. And there has been no confirmation that it is because of the vaccine. They are deaths that took place after individuals were vaccinated. That's the data. I have no interest in hiding or exaggerating or downplaying anything. That is the data as we know it right now. And with time, we will continue to get updated reports. We actually got some really good economic news this morning that I want to talk about a little bit. We are now at the pandemic low for new unemployment claims. These are reported weekly. Jobless claims, another 293,000 people filed new claims last week. That is the new pandemic era low. And we've subsequently hit lower and lower lows. The U.S. posted a much larger than expected drop in initial unemployment claims last week, bringing the numbers of those newly unemployed back toward their pre-virus pace. The Labor Department released jobless claims this morning. Initial claims ended for the week ended October 9, that's last week. 293,000 was the actual number of new jobless claims. They were expecting 320,000. In terms of continuing claims, 2.59 million versus 2.67 million expected. These are the smallest number of new filings since March of 2020. And jobless claims have been inching closer and closer to pre-pandemic levels. So there's a slowdown in firings, layoffs, and separations. Reopenings are taking place. Demand for workers is resurging. So there's a few different stories here. First is there's the narrative from the right about lazy people who now want to stay home and collect enhanced unemployment. The enhanced unemployment is, I believe, is over in all states, although there may be some states that still have funds left and are continuing it. But at the federal level, the enhanced unemployment is done as predicted. there were relatively few people who were literally saying, I would rather just collect unemployment than work, although any social insurance system is going to have some free riders. We don't really care about free riders as long as the system at the macro level is well calibrated and achieves what it's supposed to achieve. Enhanced unemployment was actually one of the biggest saving graces for millions of people during the pandemic. The fact that there were some free riders, I'm sure, doesn't really change that. But as expected, as it is phasing out, people are getting back to work. New jobless claims are going lower and lower and lower and are almost indistinguishable now from the numbers we were seeing shortly before the pandemic. So we've almost zeroed that out. Number 2 point that's relevant here. There have been those on the right opportunistically saying that vaccine requirements and mandates are going to keep unemployment rates up because people are going to say, oh, I've got to be vaccinated or, oh, I've got to be tested. No, I'd rather not work, unemployment or not. That doesn't seem to be happening. It never passed the sniff test to begin with, and it doesn't appear to be happening as the new unemployment numbers keep going lower, lower, and lower. A few other, there's actually a graph here that we can look at. U.S. jobless claims reach fresh pandemic era low. As you can see, there was this major spike in April of 2020 where there were between 6 and 7 million new claims, and those continued to decline, 5 million, 4 million, then into the 3s and 2s. We eventually got under the 1 million mark in the summer, last summer, August of 20, et cetera. And basically with just a little bit of a spike right at the start of 2021, continuing to decline, going lower and lower. Now, it's not all rainbows and ginger snaps. Yahoo Finance writes, even as the number of those newly unemployed improves, lingering concerns over the coronavirus keep a lid on further progress in the recovery. Many individuals still on the sidelines of the labor force. Demand for workers has outpaced supply. Job openings are at a near record high of more than 10.4 million in August. So there are still many jobs available, Rubila Faruqi, who's the chief U.S. economist for high-frequency economics, wrote, shortages are a severe constraint of the labor market currently. Overall, the labor market remains on a gradual path towards pre-pandemic health. The slowdown in the pace of job gains and still depressed participation rates are reminders that the process will take some time, which is fine. This is, we don't, in an economy as large as the United States, shocks to the system where things happen as quickly as that which happened in March and April of 2020 are rare, and they're not good for the economy. It's those are the types of things that cause further follow-on calamities of different kinds in terms of supply chain, in terms of all the different things that we've been talking about. So it would be expected that as we hopefully gradually continue to see cases decline, deaths decline in the United States, that we would see the labor market recover. But this, although these are the best numbers of the pandemic so far, there are still limitations to the economy. Now, probably next week, we're going to talk about wages, because one of the big kind of debates that has surfaced in terms of we need workers and we can't get them has been the right saying, well, you can't get them because they're lazy people collecting unemployment at home and they would prefer to do that. The left has said this is an issue of you're not paying enough. If you want to get workers, free market, right? Offer a higher wage and then you'll have more people interested in working for you. We're going to dig into the wage issue next week and look at so-called various quality jobs, high, medium, and low quality jobs, as they're sometimes described. We're still putting together all the data. We're going to look at that next week. If you have a story to tell about your employment path and the decisions you made based on unemployment insurance that was or was not available, write into info@davidpakman.com. You can also find me on Twitter @dpakman. And Tuesday, please don't forget, we've been planning this viewer town hall now for a few weeks. Tuesday, October 19th at 6 p.m. Eastern, we are doing a live stream on the Pakman Live YouTube channel. That's our second channel, youtube.com/PakmanLive. I would love for you to call in, open to everybody. Members will get priority on the phone lines. This will be 6 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday, October 19th. Hope to see you there. One of our sponsors is Disco. There are so many different types of bogus skincare products for men out there. What you really want to go with is just something affordable, effective, and created by dermatologists. That's why we have Disco, which delivers the science-backed over-the-counter skin treatments that dermatologists recommend to their patients every day. The Disco starter set is a simple way to take care of your skin in 3 quick steps. The face cleanser stick fights oily skin. The exfoliating face scrub prevents razor burn. And the face moisturizer keeps your skin hydrated. Disco can also help with ingrown hairs, dry skin, acne, and other things. You just need 60 seconds a day. I've been using it for a while now. I'm seeing a noticeable difference. Maybe you can even tell. Check out Disco. Try out the products for yourself. You will like the results, and you'll get 30% off when you go to letsdisco.com/Pacman or just enter the code Pacman. The link is down below. Our program continues to depend on the support of viewers and listeners to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, to the radio show, to the TV show. I would love it if you grabbed a membership at joinpacman.com. We do an extra show every day. I mean, this is not just you do get stuff, you get perks. We do an extra show every single day for our members. If you are curious about the whereabouts of producer Pat last week on yesterday's bonus show, the October 13th show, Pat explains all. Many people quite titillated, actually, by the story. Some not so pleased, but many people titillated. You can sign up at joinpacman.com, get the bonus show, get the commercial-free audio and video streams of the show. You can also participate for free in the David Pacman Show subreddit, which now has nearly 33,000 subscribers. davidpacman.com/Reddit is the place to find it. A few interesting and disturbing posts I found this morning on the subreddit. User Kiddo459 wrote, "My wife won't get vaccinated. David, sir, my wife is anti-vax, not just for COVID, but all vaccines. She was, of course, vaccinated as a kid, but due to online propaganda, she won't take the COVID vaccine and doesn't want our kids to be vaccinated at all. Any ideas how I can change her mind? And before you say it, I've already tried withholding sex. That only seemed to encourage her." I really don't have advice. I don't know how folks end up with someone with views so diametrically opposed to their own. Now, there are some people who have recently said, my spouse won't let the kids be vaccinated, who said, I really had no idea. I mean, it's not like my spouse is a right-wing nut. It's not like my spouse has been a conspiracy theorist in some other way. It came out of nowhere. They're just against the COVID vaccine. That seems to me like it would be relatively rare. I mean, I guess it's possible that there was no sign whatsoever, but you would imagine that there were probably some signs that maybe people didn't notice. I don't know. But unfortunately, I don't have advice. It sounds like an extremely, extremely difficult situation, which I do not envy. I know that a couple of parents called in during live calls a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months, and said, I'm thinking of secretly having the kids vaccinated. I'm going to withhold that information from my spouse, because they will go nuts, and I am determined to get our kid or kids vaccinated. These would be decisions for one to make, but I do not envy the situation. User Schemehead is taking issue with the term vaccine skeptic. Schemehead writes, the term skeptic should not be applied to those still hesitant to take the COVID vaccine. Skeptics form their opinions based on evidence, and there's more than enough evidence at this point showing that the COVID vaccines are safe and effective. People who are still hesitant to take the vaccine are not hesitant because of skepticism, but for other reasons. Maybe irrational fear, maybe misinformations, maybe my freedoms, but not due to skepticism. I think we should stop using the term vaccine skeptic. I agree. First of all, hesitant is often not accurate because they're not really hesitant. They're just not doing it. Hesitant would be like, oh, I'm about to jump into the pool, but I'm hesitating because it's going to be cold, but then I do it, right? I hesitated, but I did it. A lot of this vaccine hesitancy is just people aren't doing it no matter what. And then I agree. We do need a sort of more, a tougher term. I don't know what the term would be, but I agree that it feels weird to say vaccine skeptic or vaccine hesitant because it simply doesn't accurately describe what's going on. And then lastly, a few people writing to me and posting about this article, an article on 538, which says it looks like House Democrats are worried about the 2022 midterms. You can check out the article on 538 by Nathaniel Rakich, and it outlines how there are a number of House members that are leaving office and how that is going to impact the balance potentially, and the many reasons that Democrats maybe are worried about 2022, and there's no shortage of reasons to be worried. It would be the correct reaction. If you accurately and honestly assess the circumstances for the midterms, Democrats should be worried, and many Democrats are. In general, midterms after a new party takes control of the White House don't go well for that party. Since Joe Biden's a Democrat and won the White House, you would just historically, it's almost always the case that you would expect Democrats not to do well in the midterms. You also have, because of the retirements and people leaving to do other things, to run for mayor, Senate, different things, that also potentially is going to be a problem for Democrats. So yeah, Democrats should be worried about 2022. And we're going to be talking about it extensively. We already have been to some degree. It makes sense. And we'll dig into that more, probably really as soon as next week. Join the discussion on the subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Hey, this is just out of this world whacked. Donald Trump is now saying to Republican voters, if the so-called fraud isn't fixed for the 2022 and 2024 elections, Republicans shouldn't even vote. To which I say, absolutely. I would never go out and say don't vote, because it goes against my beliefs about participation in democracy to tell people to stay home. It just wouldn't feel right. But if Trump wants to do it and say to his Republican followers, don't vote, by all means, that sounds great to me. So let's talk about what's going on. Donald Trump tells Republicans not to vote in 22 or 24. In a new statement that he would have posted on Twitter himself if his account wasn't permanently suspended for inciting violence, former President Trump urged supporters not to vote in the two upcoming elections if the Republican Party doesn't, quote, solve the supposed voter fraud that he has falsely claimed precipitated his loss to President Joe Biden. Donald Trump's full statement, published to the desk of Donald Trump on his website, says, if we don't solve the presidential election fraud, that's capitalized, guys. Fraud is capitalized. If we don't solve the presidential election fraud of 2020, which we have thoroughly and conclusively documented, that's not true, Republicans will not be voting in 22 or 24. It is the single most important thing for Republicans to do. Now, it's grammatically ambiguous whether he says the most important thing to do is to solve the fraud or the most important thing to do is not to vote in 22 or 24 if the fraud is not solved. Now, there's two stories here. One is Trump publishing this just a distraction? And you might say, well, David, a distraction from what? There is a new report from the House Oversight Committee, which we will talk about later in the show, which found that Donald Trump received millions of dollars from foreign governments through the Trump hotels, hid his debts, and hid his losses. It's an insane blockbuster report. So part of it would be maybe Trump is saying this to distract from that story. And we'll talk about that later. The second part here is that this is the way that narcissists behave, quite frankly. If your parents say, hey, little Donnie, it's time to go home, let's leave the sandbox now. Donnie is the type of kid who would poop in the sandbox to shut it down so nobody else can play in the sandbox. When Trump is losing at an interview, like when he's not doing well in an interview, he's asking questions that are making him look bad, he walks out or he attacks the reporter. When he's losing elections, he says they're fake, and now he's telling people not to vote. I actually laughed. I was thinking about when during a press briefing, when Donald Trump did a press briefing as president, and he was asked, what do you say to people who are watching you right now and are scared? This was when COVID deaths were skyrocketing in 2020. And Trump says, I would say you're a terrible reporter. That's what I would say. this is how he behaves. And he is saying, they didn't let me become president for 4 more years. So I'm just going to try to ruin it for everybody. Republicans didn't work hard enough to steal the election for me. Nobody did. And so now I'm going to say, don't vote and ruin everything for the party, which I think is great. I think it's great. Now it's a very dire message in a sense, in terms of being a threat to the Republican Party. Trump's saying, either get behind me and support all this crazy stuff I'm doing and saying, or I'm going to actively try to destroy the party by telling our voters not to vote in 2022 and 2024. It's like a Trump way or the highway sort of thing. And I absolutely love it. Like I said, I cannot in good conscience myself tell people don't vote, don't participate. It's a form of voter suppression. I won't do it. But if Trump is telling them, by all means, listen to the guy. If you still follow him, if you trust him, if you believe in him, prove it by listening to what he's saying. These are the sorts of techniques that would really only work to manipulate morons and dolts, quite frankly. I mean, let's be a little more polite. Low information voters, ignorant individuals. But if this is what he's doing, let him have at it. And I guess, to some degree, Trump must see voting in 22 as acknowledging that the 2020 election was legitimate. I don't even know that that's really the case. I think many Republicans would vote in 22 without acknowledging that 2020 was legit. For Trump, it appears that way. And so he's trying to own the libs by saying, don't vote. Own us, please. Show us. I challenge these Republicans. Show us how strong you are by doing what Trump says and not voting in 2022 and 2024. I won't suggest it, but if Trump's saying it, go with it. I welcome it. And the real question is, will they listen to him? Will they listen to him? Let us know your thoughts. We'll have more coverage of this bizarre, but quite frankly, welcomed statement from Trump on the show's Instagram, at David Pakman Show on Instagram. Find us there. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. Today, we're going to be speaking with Jeff Duncan, who's the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia and also author of the new book, GOP 2.0, How the 2020 Election Can Lead a Better Way Forward for America's Conservative Party. It's great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
So, okay, I mean, where to start, right? Georgia has been at the center of significant political controversy. We now know about the various phone calls and requests, to put it lightly, that were made by former President Trump when it comes to the results of the 2020 Georgia election. I mean, give us your sense of the direction that the Republican Party has gone relative to where you would like to see it as a conservative party.
Yeah, there's definitely chaos on the battlefield for sure. And certainly we're watching that play out in Georgia. And I think Georgia is just a microcosm of what's playing out all over the country. I'm one of those people that I'm hardwired to be a conservative. I grew up that way, went to college that way, started my first business, raised my family. I just believe in the conservative principles. And so it pains me to watch the inability to win elections because of because of personalities, not because of our policies. That's painful to watch. And that's kind of the process and the tug of war that we're in right now as a Republican Party. And that's really what drove me to write GOP 2.0. It's not really any sort of watered down, policy positions as a conservative. It's just about a better approach to deliver those policy positions to America.
So did you vote for Donald Trump in 2020?
I did. I voted for him in 2016. I voted for him in 2020. I probably fit myself in that category of tens of millions of Republicans that did the same thing, that, really applauded the conservative wins over those 4 years, but just hard to explain to even my own kids. I talk about this in the book quite a bit. My 3 boys really shaped a lot of kind of my positions just in raising them with my wife. It was hard to explain, the tweets that went out. I'd spend all this time telling my kids, hey, be careful on what you do on social media. and then how do I explain, the former president doing what he did?
Well, how did you explain voting for him then?
Yeah, so interesting. I talk a lot about it in the story. Mine was, as I compared the Biden ideas and plans forward, really what I explained, or at least I rationalized in my mind, is really what's playing out right now with Joe Biden. I mean, nobody, this is a nonpartisan answer to this. Nobody agrees in my mind that the Afghanistan handoff was the way it should have been handled. The way we're dealing with inflation, the southern border, the only person, I mean, everybody believes in border security, except for Joe Biden. So I put those elements against what Donald Trump had done as a conservative, and I pulled the ballot for President Trump.
What exactly would Trump have done differently on Afghanistan? Because he was actually asked on a Newsmax interview, he couldn't articulate a single thing he would have done differently.
Yeah, I think looking back, now in the hindsight of 2020, Monday morning quarterback looks at he didn't really have an exit strategy out of there as thorough as I probably thought he did. But I hope that there was enough conservative leadership in his administration that would have given him better advice than what Joe Biden did, and how he executed the exit out of Afghanistan. That would be my hope, but it's only hypothetical.
Yeah, no, because it seems, since it's the first thing you mentioned that you're not pleased with in terms of Biden, but then Trump can't articulate what he would have done differently, and you sort of can't either, other than to say it's a hope you have. It's interesting to me that that's not stylistic. Like at first you said it, that they're mostly stylistic differences with Trump, but policy was where you would like to see the policies enacted. But then like on Afghanistan, it's not really clear the policy would have been any different. So I'm trying to understand sort of whether your disagreement is just on style or whether it's policy as well.
Well, we can split hairs all day long. There's a president that's in office and made the decisions, and his name's Joe Biden. And there's a former president that's not in office that did make those decisions on exiting Afghanistan. The reality is I would have hoped that more military minds would have made those realistic decisions, and they would have had more timely, thoughtful consideration for those that help support our military, those that were fully expectant to be helped through any sort of military transition or exit out of the country. My hope is any president, whether a Democrat or Republican, would have been more thoughtful for that, but that didn't happen. And I think that's the same thing that we're watching play out with the southern border. I believe in border security. It's one of the things I talk a lot about in the book. I think Republicans have totally dropped the ball, including former President Trump, on immigration. We spend all this energy kind of fear-mongering about the southern border. Yeah. And we built 460 miles of border wall out of a, 2,000-mile border or more. And the reason why I think we've dropped the ball is we're only having a singular focused conversation about a big issue like immigration, border security. But the real conversation, in addition, has got to be the 16 million undocumented folks that are here, many of which we have been full force allowing them to be embedded in our communities and in our economy. And we got to have a real conversation about that. That, to me, is an area of opportunity for Republicans to join ranks with some of the folks on the other side of the aisle to have those real conversations. And I talk a lot about that in the book.
I'm curious. This is sort of kind of like it's a sanity check of sorts. When during the 2016 campaign, where you did end up voting for Donald Trump, when he said during his first term he would build a wall across all 2,000 miles and Mexico would pay for it, did you believe that for a second?
I didn't.
I'm sorry, did you say you did not?
I did not.
You did not. Oh, okay. Why do you think so many people did believe that when he said it, when it was so obviously going to not happen?
Well, I think that's the riddle that we're trying to solve right now as a Republican Party is, how can we get people away? And look, this isn't just a Republican problem. This is a Democrat problem too. America's addicted to 10-second sound bites. We're making massive political decisions and putting our support behind folks in short clips. And certainly GOP 2.0 is really trying to build a much more thoughtful, thorough plan of attack on some of these big issues, ones that aren't in about 280 characters on Twitter or about some slogan called Build the Wall. What really drew the most ire from the former president, to me specifically, during the 10 weeks of my very intense rebuttal of the conspiracy theories and the fraudulent, the real fraud was talking about fraud in the election cycle here in Georgia. So my major pushback really started when I said, look, Build the Wall is a great project name, but it's not an immigration policy. we as Republicans need to grasp onto a serious immigration policy and start to move forward. That really drew the ire of the former president and really started a visceral downhill spiral on whatever relationship that was out there.
Yeah. So like what happened during those days between Election Day 2020, where we ultimately learned the margin of victory for Joe Biden in Georgia, subsequently the phone calls, I need Brad Raffensperger to find me 11,780 votes, give me a break. Like what were you doing at that time? Who were you talking to? What were the conversations like?
Yeah, so, I literally, within days of the election and all of this kind of rumor mill starting that there was fraud and whatnot, I dove headfirst into the details. I talked to the governor's office. I talked to the Secretary of State and his entire team. I talked to the Attorney General. And really the feedback I was getting is, Jeff, there's no signs of any sort of systemic fraud. There's nothing coming in other than just wildly placed social media posts and wild allegations starting to flow in from the Trump administration. So I started to get, as quickly as I could, get on TV for two reasons. One is I didn't want any sort of runaway rumor to take over the control of the narrative that we can run a fair, legal election here in Georgia. And two, I was trying to protect the runoff process from two conservative U.S. senators that were now engaged in a runoff. And unfortunately, we know how that turned out if you're a conservative. So I hit the TV. I probably did, I don't know what the number is, 60, 70, 80, 100 national television interviews and radio and music or print interviews. And I spoke up against it. I was one of the first folks that said, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say Joe Biden is the president-elect. And almost instantly drew ire from not only the former president, but also from, people all over the country. We ended up, receiving threats as a family. We had 24-hour security. I mean, it was an intense 10 weeks of, simply, just telling the truth. And one of the surprising things for me was, and one of the motivating factors behind writing the book GOP 2.0 was, I thought I was walking out singing as part of a Republican choir, but the reality was I was singing a solo for far too long. When the facts simply lined up that there was no fraud, there was no systemic issues going on. Donald Trump got beat, and he's the one who missed the layup. And as a Republican, I hold him accountable for not doing the things he needed to do to win.
Was there behind the scenes any consideration among Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, and other election officials of actually trying to do what Donald Trump was asking to have done?
So I'll only speak for myself, and the answer is no. There was no way I was going to move my feet. This job is not worth lying for, and I certainly wouldn't lie to 11 million Georgians, some of them who wanted, to see the scenario change. But I certainly never heard of I never had a conversation with any of the other statewide elected officials that ever appeared to me that they were considering it. But I'd encourage you to get their opinion on that.
Sure. So I guess as opinions aside, as far as you know, no.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as I know, there was never a consideration between the governor, the speaker, the secretary of state, and myself to take into consideration, because look, there was multiple avenues going at this point. There were, the former president wanted to have a special session to send a different set of electorates. We wanted to have, just all types of different scenarios were playing out that just really weren't feasible.
Do you think that the craziness that took place involving these fraud claims between November and the date of the special elections for the Senate, which I think was January 5th, do you think that contributed to both Republican senators losing their races?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And it was unfortunate. I don't claim to be smarter than anybody by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a retired baseball player for the most part, but I could see it coming from a mile away. When they, by default, hired Donald Trump as their campaign manager during the runoffs, that was the beginning to the end. Georgians wanted to be reminded of their conservative policies and positions that they stood for. Georgia fell in love with their business acumen and their ability to articulate jobs and, national security and all those things that really kind of are the tenets of why, we wanted them there and why the governor hand-selected Kelly Loeffler to represent Johnny Isaacson the remainder of his term. They forgot to do that, and unfortunately, Donald Trump got his hooks in them and, just made it all about him and his conspiracy theories.
Do you think that Trump's actions in terms of the influence campaign and the phone calls might have been criminal?
So I'm not an attorney. I told you I'm a recovering baseball player and
Sure.
entrepreneur. And
but based on
just a little bitty
conversations you've
lieutenant
had
governor.
there.
Yeah. So look, I think I'll start with they were absolutely inappropriate. They were disgusting. Whether I was whatever party affiliations were associated with it, they were just inappropriate. And I know that there's investigations going on, and they're going to certainly get to the bottom of what their opinions are from those legal investigations. But I don't have the legal acumen to split hairs and know if it was illegal or not. It was inappropriate for sure.
Fair. One of the criticisms I've had of the Republican Party of late, as someone who's not a Republican, is that the focus on policy has become close to zero. And the most prominent Republicans right now that get headlines federally are getting headlines by saying that they don't want to wear masks, or they don't want people to have to get vaccinated, or they're taking a stance against critical race theory, or Fauci's trying to cancel Christmas, or now it's Halloween. I guess Fox did a bunch of segments yesterday about Halloween maybe getting canceled. Do you think that this is a direction that's good for just without evaluating it morally, for winning races, for winning elections? Is it good to focus on the culture stuff instead of policy?
Absolutely not. I spend a lot of time in the book talking about it because, look, at the end of the day, we're all supposed to be running for these offices because we want to be in a position of leadership.
Right.
And there's no leadership to be found in all these short-term sugar high issues. I talk about in the book what I refer to as my pet project: policy, empathy, and tone. Really is a strategy to improve all of those as a meaningful way to win back the White House in 24. And on the policy front, yeah, we have literally forgotten to remind America of the policies that we as Republicans are good at. Just like you mentioned, you're part of the, you're a Democrat.
I'm not a Democrat. I'm on the left, but I'm not a Democrat.
Okay. So you're on the left. So there's certain issues that you think the left are better at, right? That's your personal position.
Sure.
Well, I think there's some things that Americans think that Republicans are better at. We just have totally forgotten to remind people of those policies that we're good at. And we've also forgotten the ability to understand that we can lead on some of these big issues. I talked about immigration a second ago. Let's talk about healthcare, right? It is an issue ripe for the picking to talk about something other than we hate Obamacare. More at 11, right? We need to put more on the bone there. We need to talk about how we center healthcare away from the government and onto the small business owners. How do we empower small business owners, who, by the way, are the bulk of the employers in this country, to be able to compete with big companies and with government programs, to be able to offer affordable health insurance to their employees, and to be able to entice people to come to work instead of just going to the mailbox to receive those. There's so many solutions that Republicans can come up with healthcare, but we got to be willing to talk about them, and not these sideshows and these distraction elements and these shiny objects that really kind of just run 2-day news cycles, and then we got to hurry up and find the next one.
Yeah, you mentioned 2024 and taking back the White House. Obviously, before that, we have a midterm election in 2022. Do you think that it helps your sort of, I don't know that I call it a side, but your approach to the Republican Party? Is it helped or hindered if folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn get reelected next year?
So I don't know. The only person I really know in that mix that I know well is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And certainly if we have more Marjorie Taylor Greenes in Congress, we're in trouble as Republicans.
Right.
That's a problem. Right.
Wow.
And I certainly have made no qualms about it, that I think she's destructive to our state. I think she's destructive to our party. I think a person like her is destructive to our country. And so it's not just enough to get Republican leadership. We got to have the right Republicans that care about the long-term viability of conservative leadership and conservative policies that aren't about little sideshows and press conferences and whatnot. Our tone matters. I talked about the pet project: policy, empathy, and tone. Our tone is so important. If simply Donald Trump had a better tone, if down the stretch he kind of became an adult and said, you know what, I'm the leader of the free world, and I'm going to use the next 100 days to really put on display my leadership style. I'm going to take my business resume on how I can coordinate the vaccine distribution, how I can manage international affairs, how I can manage an economy that continues to whipsaw. And y'all just judge me by what I do, not by what I say. Right? Just that better authoritative tone. would have made mountains of difference. I think it would have probably won him the election. But of course, he couldn't get out of his own way. And I talk about that in the book with several one-on-one conversations with him in the back of the beast that really kind of led me to see that smell in the air of defeat. You could sense, even as close to the election as 2 days before, Donald Trump came down to Georgia for a rally in Rome, Georgia, and I was there as one of the speakers. And this was eye-opening to me. I spent a lot of time in the book talking about this. I made a statement because I was trying to win the suburbs. I knew where we had to win was convince the suburbs that he was worthy of 4 more years, and I knew it was going to be close. And I made a statement in kind of closing of my 5-minute speech. I said, you know what? Our policies are so good as Republicans, they even help the people that don't vote for us. And I got booed. I literally got booed by a sea of 30,000 Make America Great hats because I was willing to say that our policies are so good they help the people that don't vote for us too. And that was an eye-opener to me that, one, the president was out there campaigning 100 miles away from the suburbs, and two, there was such a visceral reaction to even looking at trying to help the other side or even trying to build bridges or expand the size of the tent, even 2 days before the election. The smell was in the air, not just in Georgia, but all over the country.
Yeah, that's a definite red flag. No question there. The book is GOP 2.0, How the 2020 Election Can Lead to a Better Way Forward for America's Conservative Party. We've been speaking with the book's author, Jeff Duncan, who's the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. Really appreciate your time and your perspective today.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and T-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right, we have an absolutely huge blockbuster story based on a report from the House Oversight Committee, which alleges to have uncovered evidence that Donald Trump received millions of dollars from foreign governments during his presidency, hid debts, concealed losses, and we're going to look at the details of what's alleged. This is sort of like another shoe dropping, as we expected the shoes to drop after Donald Trump's presidency ended. And this might actually explain why Trump put out the statement telling Republican voters, don't vote in 2022 and 2024, which we covered earlier, to draw attention away from this report. And to some degree, it worked. As of this morning, if you looked on Reddit, on the politics subreddit, the Trump telling Republicans not to vote story had 70,000 upvotes. Trump's major ethics violations had 4,000 upvotes. So it quite literally is working. Now, both are real stories, but if the idea was to obfuscate, it is working in a sense. So let's look at this. The House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Committee uncovers evidence that Trump concealed millions in losses, hid debts, and received millions from foreign governments at Trump Hotel. Look at this. Let's actually skip to the second part. The document provided by GSA, documents, raise new and troubling questions about Trump's lease with GSA and the agency's ability to manage the former president's conflicts of interest during his term in office, when he was effectively on both sides of the contract as landlord and tenant. Specifically, the committee found that President Trump provided misleading information about the financial situation of the Trump Hotel and his financial disclosures, received undisclosed preferential treatment from a foreign bank on a $170 million loan to the hotel that the president personally guaranteed, accepted millions of dollars in emoluments from foreign governments without providing an accounting of the money's source or purpose, concealed hundreds of millions of dollars in debts from GSA when bidding on the old post office building lease, and made it impossible for GSA to properly enforce the lease's conflict of interest restrictions by engaging in opaque transactions with other affiliated entities. As discussed in this letter, This new evidence raises many questions that require further investigation and action by the committee. This is a crazy amount of alleged wrongdoing and unethical behavior. It is stunning the degree to which this was taking place, which we knew. This wasn't necessarily, we knew this was going on. We knew it wasn't being investigated seriously enough. It was obvious that this was going on. He never took care of all of those conflicts of interest. It's absolutely wild. So the documents show, look at the specifics here. Former President Trump reported massive revenues at the Trump Hotel, concealing that the hotel suffered $70 million in net losses. On his federally mandated financial disclosures, Trump reported that the hotel earned him over $150 million in revenue during his time in office, but the records obtained show it actually incurred losses of $70 million, leading Trump's holding company to inject at least $24 million into the struggling hotel. By filing misleading public disclosures, Trump exaggerated the health of the hotel. He also appears to have concealed potential conflicts of interest stemming not just from his ownership of this failing business, but also from his roles as the hotel's lender and guarantor of its third-party loans. While in office, Trump received preferential treatment potentially worth millions from a foreign bank. It is Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is endlessly involved. Every single time there's a new report about these conflicts, Deutsche Bank is involved. Trump did not publicly disclose the benefits he got. It's a deferral that he got. The Trump Hotel received over $3.7 million from foreign governments. We knew that foreign governments were staying at Trump's D.C. hotel specifically to curry favor with him and to ingratiate themselves with him. We now know it is to the tune of $3.7 million. That is about 7,400 nights at Trump Hotel at the average daily rate. Trump didn't disclose that to the GSA, and he donated to the Treasury only a small portion of those payments. And then it goes on and on. Funny business with a lease related to the old post office building, and much, much more. This is more of the same stuff that he's been doing and getting away with for his whole career. He has bragged about it. He says he knows how to work the system. He knows how to essentially ignore regulations and laws. And we knew he was doing it. On day one, where he showed up with the big stack of paper and said, here's the paperwork that my attorneys are filing in order to deal with my conflicts of interest. And we were like, first of all, is the stack even are they blank papers? That was question one. And number two, are they substantively meaningful in terms of actually dealing with conflicts of interest? And obviously they were not. This should all be investigated, as many of these seem violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which says it's unlawful for a U.S. person or company to offer or pay or promise to pay money or anything of value to foreign officials for the purposes of obtaining or retaining business. This seems to have been violated two ways, back and forth, for lack of a better term. It's the frustrating part is obviously this was going on. Obviously it was going on. And now it could take, as we've been predicting for the better part of this year already, it could take years to unwind and uncover everything that went on. And we probably won't ever really learn the full extent of it. So incredible revelations here, and we'll continue to follow them. This is it's kind of funny. It's kind of depressing. On the one hand, the post office, as it is currently operating, is operating not as well as it could, thanks to Donald Trump's selection of Louis DeJoy to be the Postmaster General. Republicans love to attack the post office. They want to damage the post office, and the reason why is to encourage private industry to replace it. So on the one hand, the post office is functioning poorly because of that, and Joe Biden can't just replace Louis DeJoy. Joe Biden has to wait until he can replace members of the Postal Board of Governors, and they can then replace Louis DeJoy. So there's not really that much that Biden can do until he's able to do that. And yet at the same time, reporters are asking Jen Psaki and Joe Biden, well, why are packages going to be delivered more slowly around the holidays? Here's a reporter yesterday asking Jen Psaki exactly that question. Take a listen.
We can. Go ahead.
Let me ask that a slightly similar but different way.
Sure.
Based on everything being announced today,
Yeah.
can this administration guarantee that holiday packages will arrive on time.
We are not the Postal Service or UPS or FedEx. We cannot guarantee. What we can do is use every lever at the federal government disposal to reduce delays, to ensure that we are addressing bottlenecks in the system, including ports and the need for them to be open longer hours so that goods can arrive. And we can continue to press not only workers and unions, but also companies to take as many steps as they can to reduce these delays.
Now, there are people who reacted and said, no, the government is the Postal Service. It's not, okay? The Postal Service is sort of this weird in-between. It's an independent business enterprise. It's under the purview of the federal government. But Joe Biden doesn't control package delivery. He doesn't control what it costs to get a tracking number. He doesn't control the logistics of certified mail or anything like that. It's an independent agency of the executive branch. And the way Joe Biden can influence it is by choosing appointees, by appointing people to the board of directors, who then can decide, do we want to keep Trump's Postmaster General Louis DeJoy or not? Now, but my best assessment is that on December 8th, one of Trump's postal board appointees has their term end. At that point, Joe Biden can replace them, and it's believed that that will shift the balance in the direction of reason, and they will remove Louis DeJoy. But it's this crazy thing where, on the one hand, they are ignoring the fact that Trump deliberately kneecapped the Postal Service through his indirect influence by selecting Louis DeJoy. That's why things are the way they are now, not because of Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't get a pick for the Board of Governors until December. But then on the other hand, they're asking Jen Psaki, can you guarantee package delivery times? No, how could Joe Biden guarantee that? That's not the way the Postal Service actually works. Now, whether they are deliberately misunderstanding that in order to ask these questions to be salacious and provocative and titillating, or whether they genuinely don't know that that's how it works, I don't know. It would be a sad commentary on the state of journalism if they really don't understand why the Postal Service is the way it is right now. And it's because Louis DeJoy is Postmaster General. He's Postmaster General because of the choices that Donald Trump made to the Postal Board of Governors. Joe Biden will get a shot at changing that in December. But it's almost like they think Biden's deciding we're going to slow down package delivery. The way Trump slowed down testing, they seem to act as if Joe Biden has control. Just deliver more quickly and fix the problem. I believe this will be solved, but it's going to take a little bit of time. And just pathetic questions, continued pathetic questions from the White House press corps. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This really cracked me up when I heard it. Yesterday, we played this clip of MyPillow Mike Lindell saying he found out that a supposedly 850-year-old person voted in the 2020 election. That's part of the fraud. Here is a caller making a similar point. It's a joke, but they do it beautifully.
Hey, David. This is Stuart from Wisconsin.
By the way, even the detail of pronouncing Wisconsin, the way Mike Pillow did, this is a perfect voicemail down to the last detail.
I want to have you know that I know two people who, one is 753 years old and the other is 827 years old.
Right.
Sloan Kettering and Johnny Hopkins, and they used to blaze that shit every day.
Yep.
These guys voted. Can you imagine?
It's crazy. Yeah, 753-year-olds are out there voting. It's wild, wild times. I'm glad that essentially everybody in my audience seems to have realized the absurdity of Mike Pillow's claims. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. As many of you know, gas-powered leaf blowers, I believe, are the devil's work. I believe they are the mark of the beast, quite frankly. California is working to ban gas-powered leaf blowers and lawnmowers. Their motivations may be environmental. Mine are sound pollution oriented. We will talk about that. Also, interest in the flu shot this season is not very high. I got my flu shot. We will talk about why interest seems to not be very high on today's bonus show. And lastly, we have the first ever approval for a malaria vaccine. Huge. We'll talk about the implications and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpacman.com. You'll get instant access to the world famous bonus show. I'll see you then, or otherwise we'll be back with a new show tomorrow. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Disco delivers affordable science-backed skincare treatments to your home. The Disco Starter Set helps guys fight oily skin and razor burn and keeps your skin hydrated. I've had great results with it. You'll get 30% off at letsdisco.com/Pacman. The link is down below.